All right, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for being with us. Today we're talking about receiving and giving. And you might have caught that I've changed that around because normally we hear people talk about giving and receiving. But I put receiving first in the title for a reason. For a reason. We need to think about the importance of receiving in our lives, in our spiritual growth. We have all been been taught certain things as we grow, as we're growing up in life. And of course, as we mature, as we become self-aware, as we become able to think about what we're thinking about, to examine our consciousness, to examine our thoughts, to examine our belief, we learn to meditate and observe what this chatter is that's going on inside this thing we call us, and we don't even really know what this is. So we have to go back from time to time, and we have to re-examine the things that we have grown up with, the things that we have accepted to be true, and we have to ask ourselves, are they really true? If so, why are they true? If not, what else might be true? This is growth. This is self-reflection. This is kind of spiraling upward. I just opened a book. It's been on my bookcase for years, and I've read it once or twice, and I now know that I have to read it again probably this week. It's by Elaine Pagels, P-A-G-E-L-S, Elaine Pagels. And if you've ever seen any of the kind of informational shows, kind of pseudo-documentaries on TV that deal with religion and religious practices and Christianity and things like that, she's usually in the show somewhere. She's interviewed in all these different shows. She's a professor somewhere of religious studies, and she's very well written on the topic. Anyway, the title of the book I picked up is called Adam, Eve, and the Serpent. And in this book, she's kind of describing how, as she was going about her studies and she was looking at the things that are taught today in the name of religion, that come from sort of a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of the story of the Garden of Eden. And she was trying to, like Judy Collins says, work her way back to the garden. She's trying to work her way back. What did this story of Adam, Eve, and the serpent mean at the time that it emerged? At the time that it emerged from human consciousness. And what does it mean now? And how has it changed? And a lot of the religious teachings that have to do with sexuality and the things that are feminist issues now, women being subjective to the man and all these kind of things, come from an interpretation or a reading of the book of Genesis, and yet that's not there. It's not necessarily what was written there at the time it was written. So the only reason I mention it, it's a good book. I think you might be interested in reading it if you can get it from a library or something like that. But the point is that the things that we were taught growing up, the things that we were told by our parents, by our teachers, by our clergy, by our friends, as well-meaning as everybody was, they may not be true. They may not be the best interpretation for us at this point in our spiritual growth. So we have to constantly go back and reflect and become aware. We have to become observers of our own life and of our own consciousness. Where did that idea come from? Because the things that we believe to be true actually do set the shape and the form of our lives. And we have to ask ourselves at some point, where did that come from and why do I believe that? We have to constantly expose ourselves to to other ways of thinking and believing so that we can have some means of comparison and evaluation and start to get our thought processes going, so we can ask ourselves, well, of these 2 or 3 opinions, how would I know? How do I decide, So much of what we're seeing going on in our culture today, you hear people talk about all of the fake news stories and the memes and these sorts of things. And I've made a study of how propaganda works. It was part of my job in learning how to be of influence, to be of influence without authority in a role as a consultant. But so much of what we see going on is people hear something that rings true to them. They already agree with it. So since they already agree with it, if somebody posts a meme on Facebook that rings true, they hit like, they hit share without ever thinking about it, And if somebody posts something that they don't agree with, that they don't like, they'll ignore it. They'll just let it go by. And this is all done at a level below conscious awareness for most people. They don't stop and think, well, yes, I agree with that, and here's why I agree with that. They just do it. It's impulsive. So what we have to come back and we have to look at some of these things that we learned as children, that our culture taught us, that our society taught us. We've got to ask ourselves, is that still my truth? And it may be. It may still be our truth. And we have to say, yes, of course it is. Of course I still believe that. As children, we were probably taught that God is love. Do we still believe that God is love? Yes, of course. Our idea of what God as love is may have evolved over the years, but we might still just agree, yes, God is love. So we've taken these things, we've kind of co-opted the mythologies from other cultures, and we have reinterpreted them as we have gone along. And the meaning that we attribute to them now is probably way different than the meaning that they originally had. I was having this conversation with someone the other day who'd been traveling the world and was remarking that the different cities that he went to, how the churches and the temples or the mosques or the synagogues, whatever was there now, was built on the top of the previous religion that was there before this new culture moved in. But that's what culture does. That's what people do. They move in and they try to impose their own interpretations and their own symbols on the strongly held beliefs of the previous culture. If we go into Celtic countries, where Catholicism came in later and the country converted to Catholicism, some of the Celtic gods and goddesses, or the very important religious people in the Celtic religions, they became saints in the Catholic religion as Christianity went in there. You see the same thing between the Greeks and the Romans. Many of the gods had the same characteristics but different names. What this is telling us is that there's a strongly held feeling associated with these ideas, but it keeps coming up in different ways. Kind of like Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols, which is an excellent book if you ever get a chance to read it. We have these same archetypes. We as human beings, we have these same ideas that are welling up through us. We are all part of the same consciousness. These ideas keep welling up through us, but they take on the costumes or the costumes and the colors of the culture of which they arise. And we'll find similar ideas in the Plains Indians of North America, as well as the Pacific Islanders of the South Pacific. In different symbology, but the idea is the same. So the Plains Indians might recognize a corn god, and the South Pacific Islanders might recognize a god who gave them the coconut. The idea is the same. God is the source of the food. So as cultures move along, they try to take the symbols and the holidays and those things that were important to the previous culture, and they try to find a new way of expressing them, so that the people who are used to celebrating at a certain time of the year, they kind of get indoctrinated to the new way of thinking. If you think of the May Day celebration, there's something in our collective unconsciousness that wants to celebrate around that time. And some of the earliest celebrations of May Day were fertility celebrations. It was spring. The animals were giving birth to their young. The crops were being planted in the field, and it was a time to celebrate the fertility of Mother Earth, the cycle of rebirth. Easter comes around this time of the year, see. So people very, very strongly, were used to celebrating. They wanted to celebrate. And then when Christianity came along, this idea of celebrating fertility, well, that was kind of, not something they wanted to do. They changed it, and it became the feast day of the Blessed Virgin. So instead of celebrating fertility, it was celebrating virginity, and celebrating what the Blessed Virgin stands for. But people were still celebrating. Later on, in Europe, in the 30s, the Nazis took the same day and they turned it into a day for workers that was designed to kind of destroy the trade unions. They had a May Day pole with a Nazi symbol on top of it. And then even after that, when communism came into more prominence, it kind of became a day for organizing the workers, organizing the labor unions. And my only point is that whatever the underlying compulsion or impulse to celebrate at that time, it's still there somewhere. But it has changed iterations as it has gone through culture to culture to culture. And that is why we need to go back and look at whatever we're looking at today and say, well, wait a second, is that what it meant when it started? And regardless of what it meant when it started and what it means today, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to me? And this whole idea of giving and receiving is kind of caught up into that. We have to look at that, because as children, we were all taught that it is better to give than it is to receive. Okay? Even in the famous prayer of St. Francis, it says, it is in giving that we receive. It is in giving that we receive. Slightly different meaning there. But we have to look at this, because what did our culture teach us about receiving that might be impacting our lives today? I remember as a child growing up in the Catholic Church and serving as an altar boy, and there was a line in the Mass that first the altar boys would say it, then years later the congregation joined in. But it was, "O Lord, I am not worthy to receive you. Say but the word, and my soul shall be healed." Every time we went to Mass, that was something that we said. "Oh Lord, I am not worthy to receive you." And many years later, I was reading some Louise Hay books, and I was working through prosperity. And that popped back up into my head. "Oh Lord, I am not worthy to receive you." And what I realized at the time was there was something in my consciousness, or something stuck way down in me, that was restricting my ability to receive, because it was tied to an idea of unworthiness, an idea that I'm not worthy to receive you. And that's why I want to bring out that it is important. It is important that as we grow, that we find these things, or we dissolve them through putting the opposite into our consciousness. But we have to find these things and go back and say, well, wait a second, that's not what that meant. That's not what that whole idea in the Mass was about. It had nothing to do with prosperity. But nevertheless, there in my subconscious mind, The two were linked firmly together. So we've been taught it's better to give than receive, and our culture tells us, that we shouldn't be greedy, and we shouldn't. I'm not saying we should, but it's kind of emphasized to us, or perhaps misunderstood as children, that if I try to take anything for myself, if I try to take what I need, if I try to get what I think is enough, that somehow that's wrong. Somehow I am being greedy. The whole deal when we were kids, the sitcoms make fun of it all the time, the mother who tells the kid, well, you need to eat your food because children are starving on the other side of the world, and the kid says, well, here, mail it to them, Somehow our worthiness to accept that which we ought to have, which we need to have for life, is restricted by what we've been taught. Now here's a couple things to think about. These are a couple things that I wanted to bring out today. And one of them is you cannot live without receiving. You cannot live without receiving. And if you don't believe me, just hold your breath. Just hold your breath. Don't inhale. Just stop inhaling for a little while. And you would say, well, Jim, you're crazy. I've got to inhale. I've got to inhale to live. You have to receive the air. The way that life is set up is you have to receive. You have to take in food. You have to take in water. You have to take in sunlight on the physical level. And you have to take in love, and you have to take in the experience of the presence of God on the spiritual level. We were kind of receiving stations in that regard. We have to receive. Now, how much we receive is a function of our consciousness. There are certain things that are done for us at an autonomous level, like breathing, or our hearts beating, or digesting our food, or things like that. When people are coming out of anesthesia, sometimes they think they can't breathe. They think they're unable to breathe. They don't know how to breathe. And they'll fall asleep and they'll start breathing again. So the conscious mind has some kind of a block, but the subconscious mind knows exactly what to do. There's things that are performed for us, and thank God they're performed for us at an automatic level. Could you imagine if you and I had to do something to make our hearts beat, or to make our lungs move, or to make our food digest? Frederick Bales tells us this. Could you imagine if you picked up your lunch and you took a bite of lunch and you said, okay, now I want this bite to go be muscle, and I want this bite to go be bones, and I want this bite to be hair on my head and things like that. We couldn't do it. We wouldn't know how to do it. It's impossible for us to do it. So there are certain things that take place without regard to requiring our conscious attention. Now, even having said that, we can restrict, or we can limit those functions based on our beliefs. Is the food that we're eating, is it going to create perfectly healthy cells in our body? Or is there something going on in our consciousness that is interfering with that process? That's what I mean. And so, our ability to receive is restricted by our consciousness, not by God's willingness to give. We are told this in scriptures over and over and over again. It is God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. The gifts have already been given. Very important in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, which kind of contains the essence of what Jesus taught. Not what is taught about him, but what he taught. The disciples are asking, well, what are we going to do here? You want us to come and follow you and study these spiritual ideas, but we're practical men. We're family men. We have boats to paint. We've got to caulk the seams. We have to mend our nets. We have to take care of our families. We have to provide. And the answer was seek first the kingdom. Seek first the kingdom, which is the awareness of the presence of God. Seek first the kingdom, and everything else will be added unto you. He was telling them that they had to receive at a different level. In other places, they're told, that Moses had manna. Moses gave the people manna from heaven, and that manna would spoil. Excuse me, I just have to fix my camera. Just stopped here. Give me just a second. Jesus was telling the disciples then Moses was able to give the people manna from heaven, and they had to get it on a daily basis. But if they listened to what Jesus was saying, they would have manna forever. They're told, I have water that will quench your thirst forever. So what he was telling the folks is, there's something deeper going on here. The disciples were stuck in the mode of thinking, I have to make this happen. And I know how to make it happen by rowing my boat out into the Sea of Galilee and dropping my nets over the side. That's the ordinary way of living. That's what I have learned. That's what I have been taught. And my belief and my expectations are locked into the fact that I have to make it happen. See? And if I want to have fish to give to my family, I have to catch them. If I want to have fish to sell at the market, I have to catch them. So we are stuck in this mode of that you and I, we human beings, we are the ones that are making it happen. And we are limiting God's ability to give through us by this belief that God can only give through us by whatever way we can make it happen. See, we're stuck in, it has to be the old way. It has to be the familiar way. It has to come through the cleverness of my intellect. It has to come through the power of my determination and my will and my ego and my charm and my personality and all these things that we see going on in the human experience. And the spiritual truth is different. The spiritual truth is saying, seek first the kingdom. Stop trying to make it happen. Find a way to open your hearts to let it happen. Many years ago, in one of the numerous things that I did in corporate America, I had a department of project managers, product managers, and what our job was to find ideas for new products to bring to the market within the industry that we were in, to find ideas for new products, and then to develop a project to hire the designers that we needed to develop the project and to actually bring that project to the marketplace and then sell it, track the profits off of it, make sure it was a profitable product. So that was kind of our job, and the things that we were developing cost a lot of money. We spent lots and lots of money on these projects, and it took many years to bring to market. And one of the men who was in my department was a very nice man, and he was very involved in social activism, and he loved talking about spiritual things. I was studying for the ministry. I was reading lots of books, and we would have conversations at lunchtime and break time, and occasionally he would pop in my office, and we would be talking about these things. And I asked him, I said, if you could do anything that you wanted to do, what would it be? What would you do? And he said, well, he said, if I could do anything that I wanted to do, I would build a soup kitchen downtown Raleigh. I would build a soup kitchen, and there I would provide food and shelter for the people who are homeless. And he and his wife, this was part of their giving. He and his wife would go from time to time, and they would volunteer, and they would work in the soup kitchen, doing whatever you do, prepare food, wash dishes, serve people, all those kind of things. And he felt so fulfilled in doing this that he thought it would be wonderful to be able to do it on a full-time basis. So my next question to him was, well, what's stopping you from doing that? If that's what you really want to do with your life, then what's stopping you from doing it? And his answer was money. I don't have the money to do it. He says, but I have a plan. And his plan was that he was involved in a multi-level marketing corporation. And he was going to work very, very hard at that multi-level marketing corporation to get himself to the point where he was getting a residual income of $1 million a year from other people selling the products and services. And he was going to take that $1 million a year and then he was going to use it to fund his not-for-profit soup kitchen. And I pointed out to him, I said, well, you're kind of stuck. You're stuck in the fact that the only way this can come to you is for you to become very, very successful in this marketing organization and generate the income through you, through your hard work, through your efforts, through your recruiting and training and things like that. And he said, well, how else is it going to come to me? And I said, well, it'll come whatever way it has to come. If this is something that ought to be done and needs to be done, and it's of loving service, then all of God is for it. None of God is against it. And it will have to come. And he just could not grasp that. And I finally asked him, I said, tell me about the project that you're running for the corporation. He said, well, you know the project that I'm running. He says, you're my boss. You sit in reviews every month. We go over the projects. And I said, yeah, but tell me about it. I said, how much money are you spending this year on that project? How much of the company's money are you spending? He said, well, we're burning $8 million a year on this project. And I said, now how much of that $8 million is yours? How much of that did you have to go out and make? And he said, none of it. He says, I didn't have to make any of it. He says, it's the company's money and I manage it. I said, well, why do you have to make $1 million a year to fund your soup kitchen? Don't you think there's money out there somewhere that can find its way to you if you really, really want to do this? And he thought about it. I don't know whatever came of it because we kind of separated paths after that. But the reason I use it as an example is he had limited himself in his ability to receive. He could only receive it if he got it through his own hard work, through his own effort, through his own recruiting and training and development within this multi-level organization. And he wasn't even looking at other possibilities. He wasn't even opening himself up. And what I take from the quotes that I gave you from the Sermon on the Mount is that Jesus is telling us there's another way if you will open yourselves up. There is another way. But we have learned to limit ourselves for a couple reasons. We have been told that it is better to give than to receive. So we never focus on the receiving part. We focus on the giving part, which is good. We should give. I'm not saying we shouldn't give. But I'm saying if all we have to give is what is left over from what we have done to support ourselves, it will be very limited compared to what we could give if we would open ourselves up to receive a little bit more. Emerson says we are already inlets who may become the outlets of the divine. And kind of, think about the water tanks. You go through the city and you see these big water tanks up in the air, and pretty much what they do is they pump water into that tank until it's full, and then there's plenty of water in case usually they do it for fire, to make sure the fire hydrants have water. So there's plenty of water to flow at a time when they need a lot of water. And then when they don't need a lot of water, the tank fills back up. So maybe between 5 and 7 o'clock when everybody comes home, they're using a lot of water. Maybe between 9 and 10 when everybody's taking a shower to go to bed, they use a lot of water. But the rest of the night, nobody's using water and the tank fills back up. So you have this big reservoir, you have this big tank, this big reservoir. And it's ready, willing, and able through the assistance of gravity to give us all the water that we need. But if we only have a tiny pipe connected to that, if we only have a little 1/4-inch pipe coming into our house, it doesn't matter how much water is in that tank. We're only going to get a little bit of water out of a 1/4-inch pipe. A 1/4 inch is about the size that you use to hook your refrigerator ice maker up, just so you can kind of get a feeling for it. Imagine if your whole house depended upon getting a flow of water through that ice maker connection. Imagine if you had to fill the bathtub up through a 1/4-inch pipe. So it's not because the water tank is trying to hold anything back from us. It's because we only have a little pipe coming in. And what we want to come to recognize then is the size of our pipe coming in limits the size of our pipe going out. So if we have a 1/4-inch pipe coming into the house and we try to connect a 3-inch pipe going out, we're not going to get any more water going out than what the 1/4-inch pipe coming in can give us. Okay? So we want to give a lot. We want to be fully plugged into life. We want to live life to its best. We want to support the charities we want to support. We want to do the good works that we want to support. But if we want to do it to a greater degree, a greater capacity, we have to learn to open ourselves up to receive. If you've ever seen the Sufi dancers, the whirling dervishers, when they dance, they've got the right hand is held up to the sky and the palm is turned upward, and the left arm is down below the waist, and the left palm is pointed down at the ground. And they twirl and they spin. And the reason they do that is they're in the flow. They're in the flow. The divine love comes into us. The divine love passes through us. And the divine love passes out of us. We can't hold on to it. We can't keep it. We can't restrain it. No more than you can hold your breath forever. You can't take a deep breath and say, okay, this is mine. I'm going to hold on to it. I'm never going to let it go. Life will compel you to let it go. Life will compel you to release it. So what we want to do is we want to go back and examine the ideas that we learned about giving and receiving as children and realize that as well-intentioned as people were, that the way that we interpreted what they were telling us may not have been the way that we need to interpret it now. See, I think we have kind of, in our culture, developed this idea that somehow receiving is bad. And so we were told it is better to give than to receive. But I think our actual interpretation was giving is good, receiving is bad. And if we have that restricted consciousness, if we are unable to receive, we have less to give. Not only do we have less to give, but we're living life to a smaller degree than what the divine has created us to do. So I invite you to think about your own life. I invite you to think about when people try to give you something. How do you respond? How do you react? There's this kind of like this quid pro quo. You know what I mean? Even I can't say it, you know what I mean? In our lives, in that if somebody gives us a gift that is more expensive than one that we feel that we can give back to them, we're upset, you know. I can't repay that. How can I possibly repay that? They gave me this thing that's worth $3,000 and I can't give them a gift worth $3,000 back. I don't have that kind of, what am I going to do? All these kind of things go through our head, see? Well, that's not receiving, and that's not giving. Right? That's business. You give me a $50 gift, I give you a $50 gift. I give you a $100 gift, I expect a $100 gift in return. There's not giving and receiving. That's a transaction. What if somebody just came and gave us a $3,000 gift? Could we just say thank you? Could we accept it? How would we feel about that? So many times we see people, ourselves included, when somebody tries to give them, so, oh, no, I couldn't take that. No, you don't have to give me anything. No. And what we want to keep in mind is not only does that reveal to us a place where we may be restricted, but we are denying them the opportunity to give the gift that they wanted to give. See, if we consider that what we learned as children is true, that it's better to give to receive than to receive, then we have to have an outlet to give. We must give. And how can we give if others won't receive? And how can they give if we won't receive? I was talking to someone once who grew up on a dairy farm. And they were talking about how if for some reason they were late milking the cows, if they couldn't get out to the barn for whatever reason, weather or whatever reason, the cows would start to put up a fuss. And the reason was that they needed to give the milk. If they didn't give the milk, it was painful to them. So I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that in the scheme of life, you know. Here you have the cow who has milk to give, and here you have the calf that needs to receive the milk. And in nature, they do it without conscious thought, right? The calf doesn't say, oh no, I'm not worthy to receive. The calf is quite naturally drawn to take the milk. And the mother isn't saying, oh my goodness, you know, all I do is give. The mother needs to give. She has to give the milk. So in receiving, in taking the milk, the cow is actually helping the mother to give. And you see, they're in this flow of life. They're in the right hand up, the left hand down. They're in this flow of life. The grass, the sunlight comes into the grass goes into the cow gives the milk goes to the calf, and then the calf fertilizes the grass. And there's a flow of life. So what I invite you to think about this week, as we go through this week together, what I invite you to consider is, how good are you at receiving? How good are you at accepting? If something comes into your life, do you immediately have to think about, well, how am I going to repay that? If you wish to give something, do you think about, well, where's you know, where am I going to get repaid? Or do we want to stop and be in the flow of life that says, you know, the Spirit has ways that we know not of. The divine can provide for us in ways and means that go far beyond our limited consciousness ability to figure out and to accept. Imagine if the universe required the cleverness of our intellect and the assertiveness of our ego in order to create stars and galaxies and planets. And it needs none of that. It needs none of that. But yet there's an intelligence in the universe that knows how to do it, that knows what to do, that knows when to do it. So as we go through this week together, as we kind of go through this week, just observe, and be grateful, give thanks. And by giving thanks, I'm not saying, oh Lord, I am not worthy to receive you. Thank you for giving this to me. That was my old idea of thanks. By giving a blessing, by giving a thanks, I'm talking about recognizing the presence and the activity of God. As you go through this week, can you find ways to catch yourself being in the flow? can you see the self-givingness of Spirit? Can you feel the self-givingness of Spirit as it comes into your life? Can you feel the self-givingness of Spirit as it passes through your life? With every dollar you spend, can you recognize that it is the love and the energy of God that has shown up in your life, providing for you that which is appropriate at this time? With every dollar that comes into your bank account, to your checking account, can you bless it and recognize that it is the love and the activity of God showing up in your life in a manner that is appropriate for you at this time? And can you open yourself up to recognize that in the grand scheme of life, in the grand flow of life, that the divine has more to give than we're ever going to be capable of receiving? And the divine has already given the gifts, When I was a little guy in catechism class, one of the things that we had to memorize was the answer to a question: why did God make you? Why did God make you? Now you have to envision a little first grader being taught this by rote. Why did God make you? And the appropriate response, as far as the catechism and the nuns were concerned, was God made me to know him. Remember, God in that tradition was a male character. To know him, to love him, to serve him here on earth, and to be happy with him in heaven. Now, as a 5 or 6 year old child, the meaning that I accepted or I assigned to that is totally different meaning than I have for it now. But I think it's still a pretty good definition. Still a pretty good definition. See, God doesn't need anything. God does not create out of need. God creates out of joy. So as a child, I thought, well, God needs us to serve him. What does that mean? Well, of course, it meant to obey the commandments and to follow the rules and do what the nuns told us and all those kind of things. That was part of it, what was drilled into us. And then helping each other, being God's instruments of love to each other, serving the poor, giving to the poor, and all those things. We were also firmly given the opinion that becoming a member of the clergy was a good way to serve. We were kind of steered in that direction. Every little kid wanted to be a priest or a nun. But God doesn't need us to do anything. We have to stop and think about that. That which is all-knowing and that which is all-powerful can already do whatever it wants. So it doesn't need us. It doesn't need us to praise it. That would be kind of narcissism, a narcissistic God. God doesn't need us to tell us how wonderful it is. Anything the divine wants to do, it can do. So if God does not create out of a sense of need, then why does God create? And it is out of a sense of giving. In some traditions, we are told that the reason for creation, the reason that God created souls, is so that it would have something to give to. And it could enjoy its own self through the gift. So you and I then are these instruments that the divine has created. And we have entered into the experience of ignorance, into the time, space, the earth experience of ignorance. We have emptied ourselves out of our intimate knowledge of the divine and entered into an experience where we could be refilled. This idea comes to us. You'll find it in some. I think Carolyn Miss writes about it, but I studied it in some teachings of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. The first act of creation was to create the vessel that could receive, and that was the soul. But the soul was so close in proximity to God in heaven, if you want to call that it was filled. It was already filled. So it had to find a way to empty itself out so it could participate, and that's the important word, so it could participate in the self-givingness of God. So the soul decided to enter into the human experience. We left the garden, but the garden was someplace else. And we came here, and we're being refilled. We are receiving. So we are participating in Spirit's desire to give by opening ourselves up to receive. And as we open ourselves up to receive, then we have more to give to others. We have more to share with each other. Our love, our finances, our charity, our labor, all of these things, none of them did we create by ourselves. All are gifts that we have received from God that we are simply blessing and passing on. As everything comes into your life this week, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, the smiles, the loves, the telephone calls, the money, the materials, the goods, the services, as everything comes into your life this week, say thank you and accept it. I accept. I accept. Bless it. Use it for the highest good while it is in your presence. Pass it on in your own unique way. We are part of this circle of life. Dr. Holmes wrote an essay that says receiving is as important as giving for this whole purpose, to awaken us to the fact that we, in our society, we have tried to cut ourselves off from the very fountain of life, the very fountain that sustains us. And it is time to open ourselves up and release and let go of every and any idea that we have to do it ourselves. But rather in all humility submit to the idea that, of my own self I do nothing. I couldn't even beat my heart. I don't know how to get my lungs to take the oxygen from the air. But the love that sent me here knows how, so now I open myself up to greater ideas of receiving, to greater ideas of giving, to serving God by receiving the love that it wants to give and passing it on. You are God's instruments of love. The heaven that we will be happy in with God is not a place that we go to when we die. It is a state of consciousness of being in the presence, awareness of God. It is a state of consciousness of being aware that we are in the presence of God. Take time this week to receive the greatest gift that has ever been given. Our ability to become aware of the presence and the activity of God in us, as us, and through us. Bless everything that comes into your life. Bless everything that goes out of your life. And bless every moment that you have to live. It is truly a miracle. It is truly a gift. Accept it and celebrate it. And so it is.